Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased to have Katherine Maslen on the show. She's a naturopath, and we're here to talk about chronic disease in the United States and the world and the state of health as a whole. Like, why are we in the situation that we're in today? Thanks so much for being a guest on the show.
It is my absolute pleasure to be with you, Laura.
Yeah, so we connected actually at PodFest, which is a podcasting conference in Orlando. And it's really fascinating because we met right before it feels like the entire world changed. Like that was the
Yeah.
last big event. It was literally the beginning of March. And I remember flying home from there. There's already some start of this stuff in the news. And then literally I got home and the next day was the announcement from Trump here in the United States where it was like things are shut down. And it was like, I was so glad that I went to that conference because like it was like the last opportunity.
And there were 2,000 people at that conference. And I remember It was the start of COVID because people had little tags that they could put on their name tags saying, I'm okay with hugs or I'm not. Like it was still an early stage, whereas things have really escalated since then, haven't they?
Yeah, I think if that conference had happened even like 1 week later, they would have had to just cancel. And there were some people who canceled and didn't come like at the last minute. But yeah, I'm very grateful. I'm grateful I met you and we were on a panel together talking about health and health podcasting. And you have an amazing podcast called The Shift, which is about gut health. And actually it's like an audio docu-series. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's actually a 12-part audio documentary series, and season 1 was released last year, and it's all around gut and surrounding health, and season 2 will be released shortly, and that's all around hormonal health.
Oh, both so important and definitely feed into one another. So how has that been? Because you've been producing that second part during the pandemic. How's that been for you?
Well, interesting, because with The Shift, it's quite a highly produced podcast. And season 1, I interviewed 24 people in person. So I did 12 states in the US and London in 3 weeks back in January 2019. I was in the States for Podfest, speaking at Podfest in the March. I did a few interviews then, but I was meant to come back in May and do the next round. And obviously that didn't happen. And then I was waiting and I was like, oh no, I'll just see what happens. Maybe I can get there in like November. And then there was a point where I was like, this is not going to happen in person. So at the moment, we've just been organizing everything to do it virtually. And I guess the thing is, because the quality is so high, we sort of set that benchmark. It's just relying on things like shonky internet sometimes, or people having the right microphone and things like that we're just trying to help people navigate while maintaining the quality. So it's been interesting, but at the same time, the season was pushed back about 6 months, and that created space for me to do what I need to do in my business. So I have a physical business in Brisbane, Australia called Shift Brisbane, and we have a wellness team there of 15 women. So I had to kind of look after them and navigate COVID on the ground with all of the government regulations and everything that's been going on as well. So it's been a bit of a crazy time.
Yeah, I think there's not an area of our lives that is not touched by COVID, but those of us who are working in any area related to health or wellness, we've been especially impacted because it's such an important time. And I think this is a great time to talk about all of this from the perspective of why are we not healthier as a society? I think, yes, COVID is real. It's something that is definitely harming people. But there's a lot of evidence to show that people with morbidities and especially comorbidities are far more at risk. And especially in the United States, we have a very unhealthy population. I think that's a pretty safe statement to say as a general rule. So can you talk about that from your perspective as a naturopath and the sort of state of health as a whole?
So as a naturopath, one of my roles is to look at the health holistically, right? We're looking at all parts of the body. So naturopathy can be a pretty broad term, I guess. But in Australia, naturopaths have a 4-year bachelor degree, and it's very biochemical, bioscience-based, right? So we're looking at physiology and all of that stuff. But then there's also the other side of it where we're really interested in emotional health. We're really interested in lifestyle medicine. We're really interested in prevention. So when I have a patient that's coming in front of me, I'm interested in the landscape of their entire health. What are all the different pieces of them and how do they fit in all together? And then I'm interested in, well, what is the landscape of our population health, right? Because that's really going to determine who's sick and why are we sick. So obviously I'm a naturopath. I see people that are unwell. So I have this sort of biased lens, but what I've been doing a lot in the last few years is just a lot of research into human health Why are the reasons that we're sick, and what are the trends and what are they showing? So when I went and did my interviews for season 1 of The Shift, I learned a lot of interesting stuff about gut and microbiome and all of this really interesting things. But the thing that really shocked me the most was when I started looking into the true rates of chronic disease in America, in Australia, in UK, in all of these developed nations, the results were simply shocking. Okay. So when I say chronic disease, so just for clarification, a chronic disease is anything that is chronic, obviously, but it's something that affects your quality of life and that is persistent sort of throughout the lifetime. Now, another word for this is non-communicable disease, and this is the term that the World Health Organization would prefer to use. So NCD, or non-communicable disease, is another word for chronic disease. It means you can't catch it from person to person. So for instance, COVID is a communicable disease. Okay, you and I, we could catch it from one another. Whereas, you know, diabetes, heart disease, asthma, autoimmune disease, you know, chronic sinusitis, all of these things actually are not able to be transferred from one person to another. So when I did the podcast, I interviewed quite a few experts and we had a lot of conversations around chronic disease. And then of course, because the podcast is a documentary series, I narrate it, I had to do my research, right? And make sure that I had all my facts straight. And I thought, you know, it'd be good to have some stats in here. And I spent a whole day researching for this particular episode. It ended up being called The Decline of Our Species, you know, so it's looking at, as humans,
Wow.
you know, we've always, you know, like been on the top of the food chain type of thing. But if you have a look at the rate of increase in these chronic diseases, there's only one way to go unless we turn things around. So one of the biggest stats is that 71% of humans worldwide will die of a chronic disease. Okay, so 71% of us will die of a chronic disease, not old age, not getting hit by a bus, you know, a chronic and usually preventable disease, okay, in most cases. So 7 out of 10 of us, this is the way we're going to go. In the UK, that is 85%. In the US, when I was doing my research, it was 6 out of 10, they reckon. But I feel like the stats in the US are a little bit off when it comes to some of these type of things, just based on my research. So think about chronic disease in the context of quality of life and how we live our lives. So we're living longer, but we're living sicker. Okay, so we may live until we're kind of, you know, 80, 90, whereas our ancestors may not have, but we're definitely living sicker. And for a lot of people, they're ending those last years of their lives in a nursing home or on care or with things like dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. So the quality of life in those later years for the majority of us is actually quite poor. You know, we're either in pain or we're in institutions, and it's not really conducive to health, right? You know, if you think about it, by the time we hit 50, you know, 50 years old, we still have a third of our lives to live out, you know, and this is the time where people start really clocking up these chronic diseases. So a few other things around NCDs or chronic diseases is that once you have one, it begets another. So once you're diagnosed with one, it's like you've joined the cohort. It's more likely that you'll get another and another and another. So in the UK, 54% of people over 65 have at least 2 chronic diagnosed diseases that they're dealing with. Okay. And then as you go up the ages, that gets more and more. And as you can imagine, if you're in the traditional medical model, you get diagnosed with a chronic disease and then you're given medication, and there's no way back from that. So most medications that are prescribed by doctors are prescribed without a plan to get you off them. It's like, you have thyroid disease, here's some thyroxine. Well, how do I get off it? No, you just take it for the rest of your life. You have high cholesterol, you know, stop eating saturated fat would be their recommendations, but you'll just be on this for the rest of your life. And then as people go through in this type of progression, they end up with more and more and more medication, with more and more side effects, and then more and more disease, right? So this is, you know, and I knew this, I'm a naturopath, you know, we're taught to manage chronic disease. I feel like naturopathy and allied and alternative health actually are the people that need to lead the way when it comes to this thing, because modern medicine isn't there to prevent, it's there to treat the actual disease process, or to just mask the disease process in most cases. But when I started looking at the numbers, I was like, this is terrible. really and it gave me a little bit of a shock in a way, because obviously I'm working with this, but to have a look at the numbers, because I went through every single condition. Cancer, nearly all types of cancer on the rise, respiratory disease on the rise, diabetes on the rise. Another really interesting one was life-threatening anaphylactic allergies. So life-threatening anaphylactic
or whatever.
So you'd know that and observe that. So things like peanuts or you know, really other common ones are things like dairy, etc. But there's more and more, shellfish, and even random other things that now kids and adults are being allergic to. So what happens in this instance is that we have more and more kids entering the emergency department, and the kids entering the emergency department for life-threatening anaphylactic allergies had doubled in the last 10 years. Okay. And you don't have to be a statistician or a mathematician to do the numbers and go, if things are doubling every decade, if we don't actually turn this around, what is going to be the reality for humans in 100 years? The other really interesting one is around fertility and infertility, you know, and the steep increases or in infertility rates or decline in human fertility. And, you know, the reason for this is fairly obvious when you look at it, but things like sperm has declined by 50% in the last 50 years. You know, that's half. If in the next 50 years it halves again, we're looking at a Handmaid's Tale type situation, you know. And for anyone who's watched that series, you know, when I watched this Netflix series, and if you haven't checked it out, it's quite disturbing, but also really addictive. But it's basically set in modern times, but there's a patriarchy and there's huge rates of infertility. So what they do is they round up all the women and they make them concubines for sort of the wealthy so that they can have children and grow the population. But there were just too many disparities in this show. And I'm like, well, patriarchy's happened, you know, definitely. There's been this whole suppression of women and patriarchy and stuff like that gave me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. But the other one is, you know, we are in modern times and our infertility is declining. You know, and it's not going to be in our generation, and probably not even my daughter's generation, maybe when she's a little bit older, but the generation after that, if we keep on this trajectory, there's problems, right? There's a lot of problems. So it sounds a bit doom and gloom, and it is, right? If you don't do anything about it, if we don't shift this, if we don't change this, then as humans, our health is not headed in the right direction. And this is where we are beginning to see this shift, and people are waking up a little bit and really understanding their bodies more, rather than sort of, you know, eating what's advertised on TV. But there's definitely a long way to go. And then if we come back to the kind of the original question, Laura, where we were talking about what's going on right now in the world, right?
Yeah.
Because COVID's not a communicable disease, but the people who are dying from COVID, by and large, are the unwell and the elderly, okay? And they're people who have these non-communicable diseases. So there's actually there are definitely healthy people who are getting COVID and are affected. So I'm not saying that that's the case, but the majority of people that are dying of this disease are already sick, okay? And this is where I feel like, as you were saying, Laura, I agree. COVID's real. It's an infection. It's definitely harming and killing people. We definitely need to do something about it, right? But where is the conversation around, okay, well, already 71% of people worldwide are dying of chronic disease. This is not going to be the last pandemic that's coming our way, you know, surely, hopefully in our lifetime, but who knows? But what the way that we fight it? You know, is it by trying to find a vaccine and just inoculating everyone until the next thing comes along? Or is it to really turn this around and look at our long-term human population health, you know, which starts with our kids, you know, and our pregnant mums, and it starts right here now. And I think humans in general, we have this really uncanny ability to look at the here and now and to not future plan too much. You know, a lot of us who are in our 20s, 30s, 40s, we're not really thinking about what's going to happen when we're 60, you know. So when we're partying or too stressed out or doing all the things to our body right now that will have impacts back then, it's really hard to fathom what that means. And research certainly shows that as well. But I read a really interesting study which was talking about, we don't have an imagination to really look at these things a lot of the time. And they did a study on people that one of them, and they were trying to get them to change health habits, right? If you do this, etc. And one of them, what they did was they used that software that face changes them and shows them what they look like when they're really old, right? Yeah. So they used the software and they were like, this is what, you're going to look like if you do this, and this is what you're going to look like, the healthy version. And the people who had that
that's
visual,
so good. We totally need that.
Yeah, right. So it's really interesting.
I think that's a really good point. Humans are really bad at risk assessment and that long-term planning. Like the things that people are afraid of are like really not what they statistically should be afraid of, in the sense of, for example, cancer is a way bigger issue than many other things. But like I saw this presentation, it was like a head guy from Google, and he was showing like the statistics of different things, and like dying from fire was like really low compared to like dying from cancer. But like I think people are far more fearful of things that are violent or sudden, like that. And I completely agree that is a good strategy to use the images for people of projections. And it is fascinating because I think there is a huge connection between how we look in terms of what we typically call like beauty, or things that are appealing to us, to the human eye, and health. A lot of the things that we consider beautiful are connected with health in one way or another. And as I've cleaned up my health, I feel like I have shifted my appearance as well. And when I was younger, there were times I think I looked older just because my health was not in an optimal state. And as I've shifted that, then that's also changed. And so that's, especially for women, I think that's a really good strategy.
Yeah, and it's trying to like move health, into this thing where it's about your life.
Yeah.
It's not just about feeling good right now. It's not just about losing weight. Like it is actually part of your life, and then we kind of then can open up that conversation and go, well, why do people largely not do the right thing sometimes? Is it lack of education? And I think definitely a little bit there is a lack of education around the severity of some of these things and the outcome. And I know for me, I get a lot of clients that come in from time to time and they're like, hey, my grandmother has dementia. This is the pathway. I don't want to go down that same pathway, or my mum has diabetes. I'm starting to show these signs. I don't want to go down that pathway. So they're conscious, right? They can see it and they're like, I don't want to become that, they can vision that. But for other people, they're just, that awareness just isn't there. And I guess this is part of my mission, and what I really want to achieve, I guess, in this lifetime is really trying to change the face of health. From sick care to healthcare, from reactivity to proactivity, for us really, finding a space where we love ourselves enough to nurture our bodies and give them what they need to heal. And I think that's the bigger mission of what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think this is really important. And I think that what COVID has done is really bring to light the lack of health in our societies. And this is happening in a lot of different places, like you mentioned, but especially developed countries. And I feel like our bar for health is so low, and this is bad for a number of reasons. But as an example, most people are getting labs when they're sick, when there's something wrong and they're trying to diagnose this and what's wrong. And then you go to get a lab when something's probably not right for you. And then they compare your labs to those other people who had labs who also are not doing great. And then that's being compared for what is within the quote unquote normal range. So this happened when I was trying to figure out some things for myself, and they're like, you're within the normal range. And I'm like, yeah, but I just knew I wasn't right for me. Like things didn't feel right. And I think that alone is a problem. Like, why aren't we doing more preventative care, more like, really what's going on, not just looking at the symptom, but why is even that symptom coming up? And that's why I think looking at things through like how your approach is through naturopathic angle is so helpful, because you're really looking at that bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it's not about vilifying doctors. Doctors are doing the best they can in the system they were trained in with the information and medicine that they have. It's what we talk about a lot on the shift, and I'm talking about this with medical doctors, who have been in the system and done it, and then have gone on to look at some different ways of healing and take more of an integrative approach. Is that mainstream medical system is fundamentally flawed. It's a system where doctors are overworked. It's a system where appointments are very short. It's looking at, I'm sure there's a lot of doctors that actually would like to take that time and depth to find out what's wrong, but they're in a system where they just can't. And if they want to go outside of the norm, then they're not in the insurance system anymore, and everyday people can't access them, right? So there's this real disparity, and I feel like toxicity within this medical system. And it's beginning to change, but it's not going to be for a long time. Like one of the things that we talked about on the shift was it takes about 17 years for new transformative research to make it into the mainstream. So let's say, for instance, when I was studying naturopathy, we were talking about the microbiome, and that was about 14, 15 years ago. We were talking about bugs in the gut. We didn't know heaps, but we knew that there were like these good and bad bacteria. We knew about lactobacilli and bifidus and sort of the basic stuff. But we don't know what we don't know now. And now you're seeing in the last few years, doctors beginning to uptake on probiotics, and recognize that antibiotics are ruining the gut. And that is 15 years down the track. Okay. And the problem with this type of approach is that then, yes, now they're beginning to kind of get on the bandwagon, but by the time that that's really integrated. There's all this new stuff that comes through. So the way that we look at human health is very, very different. And if you look at it in using the microbiome and gut health as an example, we've been doing all of this research on human DNA. So we've got the Human Genome Project. We're looking at all of our human genes and what it means, and looking at what genes we pass on to our family and which diseases we may be predisposed to, all of this important research. But if you have a look at the microbiome in comparison, you can tell that it's actually even more important. So what's really interesting about the microbiome, for those that are new to this, is that inside of you have 2 to 3 kilograms of bacteria, yeast, fungal organisms, viruses, all kinds of things that live inside of your gut, right? So which is about—
We are a world, we're like a universe all on our own. It's kind of amazing.
Oh, it's insane. It's crazy, right? And these little bugs have all kinds of roles. So 80% of your immune system is in your gut. They create serotonin and GABA. They control inflammation. If you have issues with your gut, you can have issues with brain health and inflammation in your brain. Your cells in your gut communicate to cells in your body. So if I break down the cells of your body, you are 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells, roughly. But if I break down the DNA of the human body, we are actually over 99% bacterial DNA and only less than 1% human DNA, right? And so all of these billions and billions of bacteria that live inside of us have these huge roles in regulation, okay? And they can actually turn our genes on and off. So when I interviewed for the shift, I interviewed a really amazing gentleman called Dr. Rodney Dieter, and he is a professor at Cornell University, a professor of immunotoxicology, and he's written a book called The Human Superorganism. And I like to mention it a lot because he's not like massive, right? He's not on social media. He's not like doing his thing, but his book is fantastic, right? So it's called The Human Superorganism. I recommend you check it out if you're interested in gut health stuff, because he paints this picture of like what he decided to do was go into research to look at, if I look at babies, what is the biggest determinant in their health long term? Okay, so if I look at a little baby child, what are some of the clues that will tell me how many of these NCDs that they're going to develop throughout their lifetime and what their health is going to be like? And the thing that he found was it is the health and robustness of the microbiome. Okay, so your microbiome you get through your mother's vaginal canal. Okay. And then in the first 2 to 3 years of life, all of the interactions that you're having with the environment will actually help you to develop an adult-like microbiome. So we're not born sterile as babies, but pretty close to. There's not a lot of bacteria in there. And then through these years, we develop it through drinking breast milk, which has prebiotic fibers in it, through tasting everything in the environment. And this is why babies are on the floor and touching and putting everything in their mouth, through mum and dad and their microbes from pets. Like all of these different factors will help to develop this baby's microbiome. So let's say, for instance, if we have a baby that was born by cesarean section, or their mum's microbiome might not have been great because she may have been stressed or on antibiotics or had a poor diet, or because her mother's microbiome may not have been great, right? And then we have lots of these young children that they're sick. They have respiratory infections. They have ear infections. I get little girls getting urinary tract infections, antibiotics. And so this child, by the time they're 3, already their microbiome is completely smashed. The diversity is messed up, and they don't have that robustness that they need to prevent this chronic disease later in their life. Okay. And these are the type of clients that I'm seeing in my practice that are in their 30s, 40s, that have, several of these different conditions that we're working in. And when you look at the timeline, you can see where it began, right? So this is where I feel like the stuff I loved around looking at the microbiome is that it's changing our concept of medicine, right? It's changing our concept of medicine to go, hold on a minute, like these microbes interact with cells of our body. And in addition to that, the microbes in our environment interact with our microbes. So the plants that you eat, you usually will have remnants of soil. That soil has microbes, and we will eat that, and that'll actually add to our microbiome. If we're fermenting foods, that has microbes in it. Even the things we touch, your skin has a microbiome, your vagina has a microbiome, your blood has a microbiome, right? And what we know is that there's a synergy between the microbes in the environment and our microbes, and science is showing this. And what I love about that is it shows, well, there's a synergy between all of us. We are one. Right. And you can't ignore that. And I feel like for medicine, it's going to create this real turning point where it's like, well, we are one. Look, it's not too much of a stretch to go, our microbes interact with other microbes, that, there's other things at play in the body. It's not so compartmentalized as it used to be. And I think this is the biggest problem with medicine, is really compartmentalizing everything and going, okay, well, you have asthma, we just need to treat your lungs. or you
Yeah.
have cancer, we just need to remove the tumor and do chemotherapy, and not thinking, well, what about your gut health? What about stress? What about sleep? What about what you're eating? And taking more of a holistic approach.
Yeah, and I also want to just completely reiterate what you said, that it's important not to criticize, doctors or medicine as a whole. Like I have many loved ones in my circle that are doctors, nurses, other health practitioners, and I think it's really important to support them and their work. But I do think the system as a whole really needs to shift and incorporate this knowledge, and hopefully incorporate it faster. Like what you're saying, there's this major lag between when things are discovered and when it's incorporated, and also a more holistic approach. And I think this microbiome and its effect on even what we consider chronic diseases is actually going to continue to develop, because there are some, for example, bacteria or viruses that we now know have at least a role in cancer, certain cancers or things like that. And I think that's an exploding field that's just going to develop and grow. For example, there's a certain, I think it's a virus that leads to cervical cancer, and that, that's why they have a vaccine for that particular type of cancer. But I think that this is just an area of research that's going to explode. And I think there's actually far more here than most people realize.
Oh, so much. And it's exciting, right? It's sort of like watch this
Yeah.
space. And I think, the integration will come. There has to be a point where conventional medicine, and I like to call it's a new medicine, like traditional medicine, that's medicine, it's been around for thousands of years. Conventional medicine has been around for like a couple of hundred years. It's a very small blip in the thing, and it's so important and it's advanced us so much. But there will be a point of integration, I feel, where and it may not be complete, but it'd be enough that a doctor knows their scope to go, oh, what else, there's something else out there, maybe you need to go and see a naturopath or get some acupuncture, etc. It is interesting times, definitely. Even from when I graduated 13 years ago or 14 years ago to now, there's been a shift, and it's only going to change more and more, I'm sure.
I'm so glad you have done this docuseries on gut and gut health, because I think that's so ignored by most people. And certainly now during COVID times, I wish that this was discussed more in regards to immunity and our overall health. But there's so many things that the more I learn about this, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, it all comes down to the gut. So the gut brain connection, so depression, things that we think of as more like psychological or mental health issues, a lot of it's in the gut, toxins that impact the gut, and then that has an impact on our hormones, et cetera. Can you talk more about some of the things that might surprise people? Like, we all know our digestion is in the gut, and like if you have poor digestion, you're not going to feel good. But like, what are some of the other impacts from the gut that might surprise people?
So the gut's really interesting because it prevents disease in two ways. The first way is what I mentioned before with the microbiome. Okay, so having a healthy microbiome and preventing disease that way. But the second really important way is that it's where we actually absorb all of our nutrition. Okay, so nutrients, vitamins, phytochemicals, like these are the things that actually keep us healthy and keep things running. So if you think about it, in your body, you've got all these different processes that are running at all different times. And in order to keep that running smoothly, we need to have the right nutrition. So the amount of times I've seen people who are eating great, they're eating all the salads, they're having vegetables, they're having like their diet is balanced and amazing, but they are showing signs of nutrient deficiency is just phenomenal. Okay, so it's like we need to obviously eat all these healthy things, but if we can't absorb it, we're only doing half the way. So what that means is that you end up with an increase in all disease imbalance problems if you're not absorbing the nutrients that you need to prevent them. Okay. The other part around gut function is, as we were saying, there's just some really specific things that it does. So 80% of your immune system is in the gut. And if you think about like the way that your body protects us from the environment, so we have barriers. So we have our skin to stop. So when we touch stuff, it doesn't get into our body and cause problems. Our gut is the main way that toxins can get into our system, right? Because we're eating, we're drinking, etc. So one of the biggest ways that we kind of accumulate toxicity is through that gut as well. But it's also one of the biggest ways that we actually protect ourselves. So we're ingesting bacteria all the time, so you can get food poisoning or salmonella or that type of thing. if our gut wasn't functioning well, like we would be getting sick constantly just from the things we're ingesting in the environment. Okay. So the first step of digestion is, well, chewing to begin with. But after that, you've got your stomach, which is acidic, right? It has stomach acid and it's literally hydrochloric acid. You should eat your food. It's going to begin to digest that. But any bacteria that's harmful should actually get eaten up in that gut to protect you before it goes through. So your gut has all of these little tendrils that come out of the membrane like this, and they're constantly tasting the environment. What's that? What's going on? Do I need to do anything? Is there anything that needs to happen as a result of that? So that's a really important part of your immune system. So when we look at things like allergies, massive gut link. You know, you can't resolve allergies without treating your gut and supporting the microbiome and working on a thing called leaky gut. So leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability is where you've got the membranes, which are normally really tight together. They begin to get weakened and you get bigger molecules passing through into the bloodstream that just don't belong there, right? And with that, it can then set off these autoimmune reactions and more allergy and reactivity in the body. So the other immune issue is that autoimmunity, right? And gut health. So all autoimmune diseases have links to gut health as well. So if you have anything immune related, allergies, asthma, autoimmunity, eczema, you know, you have to look at treating this gut. Otherwise, it's just only going to get you half the way. And there's some really good evidence for specific probiotics for these conditions when it comes to gut health as well. Ones that will help to modulate the immune system, ones that will help to reduce antibodies. It's really fascinating. The other thing that you mentioned, Laura, was looking at that gut-brain connection, right? And it works in a couple of ways. Literally, you're having serotonin that's manufactured in the gut, but I do believe that it's a lot more than that. There's a lot of messages going from your microbes to your brain. One of the people that I interviewed for the shift was talking about this concept of when we're really stressed, you'll actually train your microbes to want to look for more stress. So your microbes in the gut will actually be conditioned based on the emotional state that you're in right now. Okay. So if you're in anxiety all the time, the microbes will get used to that. It will actually change their landscape. And for people who are like, think this is a bit out there, like the thing that I like to ask you to do is have a think about it. When you're nervous, where do you feel it? You know, and it's right in the gut. You know, we feel it. We've had these terms for centuries. You know, I've got a gut feeling about this. I have butterflies in my tummy, right? So we've always known that there's this sort of gut connection, and we literally will feel it. So when we're stressed, we will literally down regulate our production of acid and enzymes, which means that then we end up with maldigestion happening in the gut level as well. So you can see there's lots of different areas and lots of different stuff that we need to consider when it comes to gut health, but it really is the center of everything. I'd be very hard pressed to think of any health issue or condition where it wouldn't be benefited by improving your gut health. And this means that if you're on a protocol for depression and anxiety, you know, and you're doing antidepressants, or you're doing meditation, or you're doing mood stuff, like, you know, do what you need to do, but also treat the gut. You know, it's coming back to that holistic thing, that one of the reasons why people don't heal is they're like, okay, well, I have hormone issues, so I'll just get a pill for that, or I'll get a herb for that, or I'll work on this, or I'll do this hormone program. But no area of the body is isolated from one another. We need to have a look at all of the different pieces. And this is where we call with naturopathic medicine is, with modern medicine, a lot of the time you'll have a drug and it'll have a side effect, you know, so you'll take the pill and the side effects of the pill are weight gain, depression, anxiety sometimes, you know, it can cause all kinds of issues. Whereas if we're using herbs that are balancing hormones, we want side benefits. So if I'm using a herb that's working on improving the health of the reproductive cycle, that's also going to help the health of other areas of the body. So when we're treating, for instance, a gut problem, I would always be using herbal medicines, nutritional supplements for the gut, and also on the other side of things, using them for nervous system stress and sleep, right? Because when you do these things, you'll get synergistic benefits, whereas the gut stuff's going to help the sleep and the nervous system stuff will help the gut. So while it might seem like a little bit of extra work or that you're doing too much at once, you want to create this synergy where you're like, all right, body, I can see there's a few areas of dysfunction. How do we provide an environment for healing? You know, and by environment, we talk about at Shift, is the environment is all the different parts that are going to allow your body to heal itself, right? The body's always trying to heal itself. That's what it's trying to do. That's what it's meant to do. Every single moment of every single day, your body is healing itself, including right now. The problem is that sometimes the environment is too difficult or too turbulent for your body to do that. So by environment, it's going to be, what is the food input that's coming in? What are the toxins that you're exposed to that it might be preventing this healing from happening, or causing disease potentially? What are your stress levels like? What is your sleep like? What is your emotional health like? What are your relationships like? Do you have joy? You know, are you in an environment that's conducive to healing? Think about it. How many of us overwork ourselves and are just busy all the time? That's not conducive to healing. You know, the amount of patients that we've had to actually make significant shifts in their mindset around how they exist day to day, able to allow that healing, is just phenomenal, because we get in this busyness. And part of that, and I know I'm sort of going on a bit of a tangent here.
Yeah, I definitely have a couple things to say. So let me know when.
Yeah, go for it, Laura, please.
Yeah. Just I think there's so many brilliant gems that you've put in there. And one of them that I really want to highlight, because I think it's significant right now, is how there's parts of our gut that will literally get addicted to certain behaviors. So I feel like we're having a fear addicted society right now, and it's literally impacting our gut, and it's significant. And also how there's so many things that are impacted by the gut, and there are significant ones that are still not being recognized by mainstream medicine. And my particular health journey was, I had all these health issues. I was diagnosed with being depressed. They wanted to put me in the pill, depression pill. I said no. And then I had allergies. So I went to, get allergy testing. And at no point did the allergist say anything about, like, you might have a lot of allergies because of your gut health or because of your diet. And it wasn't until I went to all these alternative practitioners that started to come up, and that turned out to be a huge thing for me. Leaky gut, all these things. So I really want to recommend for everyone to do the research, and especially, you mentioned all these chronic diseases that people have, like, to make sure that they are checking for multiple sources, right? Like, just because you hear from an expert, that one thing is one way, I don't think there's any one person that has all the information. So that doesn't mean, by the way, that person isn't an expert in their way, but it's like we have these kind of silos of specialists and these different things in there. And, we sometimes need to look at it from multiple different angles to get a real sense of what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And especially in this age of information, anyone can type something on the internet. So you do have to do your research and have it confirmed. And also, how does it feel in your body when you hear advice? I think our body is our best barometer. So if you're getting advice for you, like, what's the gut feeling around that? Do you feel like it's right? Do you have trepidations? And if so, look further into it, definitely.
Amazing. Yeah. So gosh, there's been so much brilliant information here, and I definitely encourage people to listen to The Shift, an incredible program. So is there, I know this could be an overwhelming kind of topic as a whole, but is there, a suggestion or a recommendation in terms of, like, what can we all do to increase our microbiome, to help that gut health, and then hopefully reduce any chronic disease that we might have?
So it's a big question, and I would have a listen to The Shift where we talk about that stuff a lot. But there's, just to name it, like, top level, to improve gut health, we need to cut out wheat and dairy from our diet often. These things are really inflammatory, hard to digest, and cause major issues for most people. Okay, so if you have any type of gut symptoms, try going gluten-free and dairy-free and seeing how that goes for your symptoms. And I would say 9 out of 10 of you will notice some significant change from that on some level. The second one is looking at processed foods, sugar, processed foods. All of these things really damage the gut microbiome and create more of a yeast type environment in the gut, and can damage some of our really beneficial species. And the other one around microbiome health is, how do we actually feed the microbiome? So when we're eating for two. We're eating food, it's got nutrients in it for us, it has fiber, which feeds our microbes. So you need to eat a diet that has a wide variety of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, really good quality fiber. So whether you are plant-based or not, or vegan or whatever, whether you eat meat or not, your diet should be plant-based, okay? Which means you're mostly eating plants. And the reason for that is plants are where we get all of our phytochemicals that prevent disease, but it's also the only place that you're going to get really meaningful fiber in your diet. And the last one is probiotic foods. Sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, if it's not too high in sugar. The commercial ones in the US aren't very good. They tend to have some other stuff that's not the best in them. But also things like miso, cashew cheese. There's all these different amazing fermented foods that are really going to help to benefit our gut health as well. And I know that was the last one, but everything overarching that is you have to look at stress and the emotions. When it comes to gut health, if you're stressed out of your mind, no matter how many of these things that you implement, your gut will not heal properly.
Great. Yeah, I think this is really important. And again, these are all kind of general suggestions, and every person is different. So it's important for everyone to pay attention to their body, do research. It's interesting because, like, for me, when I released wheat, that was huge. Gluten, wheat, I had incredible shifts in my health. And for me, what I've realized is actually all grains are inflammatory. Like, I literally can't have any grains. So how do you feel about that? Because I know you mentioned grains, whole grains, but I literally can't have any kind of grain without having some kind of inflammatory response.
Yeah, I think for most people, things like brown rice and quinoa are okay, and with grains, I wouldn't recommend them as being the base of your diet. So the the modern diet is very grain heavy, and this is why we have a lot of problems. So it's things like we're having cereals for breakfast, we're having sandwiches for lunch, we're having pasta for dinner or pizza for dinner. There's a lot of grains in every single meal. And so what I would recommend with that is, if you are having these grains, having one meal a day with them potentially, but really the grains should be a small part of it, and the rest needs to be, fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, etc. The thing with grains with some people is that they can be inflammatory if there's already this sort of driving inflammation. So I wouldn't say, for instance, that brown rice has caused people to have autoimmune disease, but for some people with autoimmune disease, cutting out grains can actually help with that healing process, and I feel like because our health is so far gone when it comes to our microbiome and gut health, etc., that a lot of these foods for some people are becoming a lot more specific in what they need to eat. It's like you were mentioning, Laura, do what's right for you. And if you eat grains and you don't feel great, then don't eat grains. It's not an essential. The essentials are fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. In my opinion, so it should really be in every single person's diet.
Great. Yeah. Again, everyone feel for themselves, but I think we can all agree that reducing processed food, reducing sugar, I think for most people, reducing or eliminating grain is going to be a helpful thing. And one thing that worked for me was, gosh, it can feel overwhelming. Like, if you're trying to change something, change one thing at a time, I gave up wheat first, and then I did corn, and I just did, gradual step-by-step process. If you try to give up everything all at once, you're probably, first of all, you might go into shock in terms of your microbiome is like, what's going on? But also mentally and emotionally, it's really challenging. So is that something you help people with, is how do you create a process to shift these things in a kind of more manageable way, I guess?
Yeah, one of the sayings that we have at Shift is that small shifts lead to profound changes. So small, but small, consistent. It's no use changing your diet and doing everything perfect for 2 weeks. You really need to do this slowly. We have a 12-week gut healing program where we do just this. We do one thing a week. We're like, right, this week we're going to focus on gluten. What is it in? What does it look like? How does it do? Next week we're going to focus on dairy. So it's just, and then being kind to yourself. You don't have to go from 0 to 100. You may, in the first few weeks, be actually just feeling out, what is gluten? What is it in? Oh, what can I try instead? No, I didn't like that. Okay, I'm going to try this. Oh, whoops, I'm still having gluten over here. But be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up through the process. So it's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. And just, if you are consistently looking to change your health for the long term and having that intention of, this week I'm just going to try and do a little bit better. And that for you might be just drinking an extra glass of water a day. It might be just switching from white bread to something that's more wholemeal, if that's all you can do. It doesn't have to be too crazy, but you do have to keep shifting. We have to always keep evolving, keep shifting, keep working on ourselves if we want to really achieve that quality of life, and live that best life.
Amazing. Well, Katherine, it's been so good to have you on the show. I'm really glad we connected at PodFest, and thank you for doing this incredible work that you're doing. If people want to learn more, connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
So jumping on Instagram, Katherine Maslen. So it's KATHERINE MASLEN. I'm also on Facebook. You can go to theshiftclinic.com.
Amazing. And you're only in Australia in terms of seeing patients physically, or do you also do remote consultations for people?
No, we do worldwide. So the Shift Clinic, we do natural health memberships worldwide.
That's great. Yeah, I think a lot of people, depending on where they are, they may not have access to someone, especially if you're in a small town or something, there may not be a naturopath near you. So I think it's great. And one of the good aspects of the pandemic is that it has really allowed for more of this type of remote work and services because it had to happen because we didn't have any other options. So I encourage people to do that. Well, thank you again so much for connecting with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me at Twitter at that Laura Powers, Instagram at Laura Powers 44, and on Facebook. Many blessings.